Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Radio Matthew Dickerson, the presenter of the Tech Talk podcast. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Pav. Good to be talking to you again.
You as well. Did you enjoy that band?
I did actually. They were quite good.
A bit of toe tapping going on there. nothing like that at this time of the morning, eh?
Exactly right.
I don't know where you find these stories from, Matthew, but you've uncovered a couple of beauties again this week. I don't know where to start exactly, but probably I did mention grief bots before, and I'd be interested to talk to listeners about this one because do you think is your grief going to be alleviated if you've got an AI to chat with, AI simulated loved one to chat with? 1300 800 222. Tell us about that. What are your thoughts on that one, Matthew? This is one of the items you got here, a grief bot. I've never heard of that before. Explain to everyone what a grief bot is.
It is quite fascinating, Pav. The language that we speak, the things that we all think we're unique, and we are, and we think we've got all these original thoughts and no one else could be like us. But the scary part here is that the way a grief bot would work is that a loved one might pass away, and so we then feed into a grief bot various text messages, various emails the person that's died has sent. Take some audio. In your case, it'd be pretty easy to get some audio samples of the person. So you get some audio samples, feed it into the grief bot, and then you can actually have a conversation with a bot that sounds like the person that's passed away, that uses the same sort of language, the same phrases. In fact, you could even be confused to think that you are speaking to that person. So...
It starts to be a little bit uncomfortable for me, Matthew, almost a little bit creepy.
Well, there is that, and this is one of the things. I think it's probably more relevant if someone's passed away suddenly. So someone's had a car accident, for example, they might feel like it's a bit of unfinished business. If someone's had a long illness, you might have had the chance to say, I really respect what you've done, or I really appreciate what you did for me, Dad, or whatever it might have been. But if someone's passed away suddenly, and this is where they seem to think that this works well, is you feel like you can have that closure and you get the answers back that will be just like you're talking to the real person. Now, some psychologists are a bit worried that people might not use it in the short term, they might use it in the long term. So 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later, they're still having these conversations with this person that's passed away. And of course, when that happens, it might get to the stage where you just not letting go, you're not moving on. But in the short term, the idea is that you are able to have these conversations with someone and maybe alleviate that grief as you go. But what's scary here is how easy it is to make a computer, to make an inanimate object sound like someone that has passed away, or sound like someone that's alive if you wanted to, but get to that point where just by feeding in these samples, if you like, of their language, samples of their audio, get to the point where you could have a conversation and the answers you get back sound just like you're having a conversation with someone. And that's the thing that scares me, which shows maybe we're not quite as different or as unique as we think we are. Maybe we're at the point where we could actually be copied pretty easily.
Yeah, look, I mean, also, because there's the voice, the familiarity of the voice, but there's also that personality that you're saying has been built into these things, because it goes through all your old correspondence, sees how you basically probably picks up a little bit about your, profile, I suppose, your psychological profile, as well as sort of language you use. They can probably get pretty accurate.
Very accurate, very accurate. And this is the scary part, Pav. We don't realise how many expressions we use that are the same expressions, or how many things we say that are similar to what we said. We all think we're coming up with these great different creative ideas all the time, and we're all very clever and creative and funny in what we're saying. But if you break it down, we probably aren't quite as different as we think we are. So those little turns of phrase, those little ways we say things, the answers we might give, those type of things, they can all be pretty quickly absorbed by an AI tool, and then use those in the way they might be answering or having a conversation with someone. That's the thing that scares me in terms of technology. Of course, you can use these things for bad as well, and we see sometimes people do deep fakes of people. We've seen famous or infamous incidents where someone famous has been promoting a certain product, that type of thing. And again, that's by taking samples for that person, and then the way they talk, the turns of phrases, the expressions, all those things can be easily replicated. So that's where it gets a bit scary in terms of AI and in terms of the tools that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, we get enough nonsense and nuisance phone calls as it is. Imagine if they're sampling your voice while you're doing that. And then,
Yeah.
we have heard examples of people being receiving phone calls from supposed loved ones who are asking for money and stuff, and they're hard to tell apart. They think that's their loved one actually talking to them. And it's going to be more and more complicated, more and more difficult to tell these apart as the technology improves and gets fancier and more accurate.
You almost need some little phrases with your loved ones so that you can ask something and say, I expect a certain phrase in return, almost like a spy. It's like, under the yellow bridge, and then what's the answer to that? So you almost need these secret things that no one else knows, because replicating the voice is pretty easy. I've actually done it myself. I tested it. I found a site online and I wanted to see how accurate it was, and I just fed about 2 minutes of my voice into this tool and then typed an expression and let it come back to me, and it was pretty accurate with my voice with an American twang. And that was a free site that I could spend, say, about 2 minutes training. With a bit more training, or if I went to some of the paid sites, I reckon I could get rid of that American twang and sound exactly like I do. So that's a bit scary. And of course, we've seen things in the American elections already where Joe Biden has supposedly been ringing people, and of course it wasn't Joe Biden, but it sounded like his voice, it sounded like the way he would speak. So it's not just our loved ones that might be trying to trick us, and not really our loved ones, but someone pretending to be our loved ones trying to trick us. It's famous ones like that. I know Tom Hanks was supposedly promoting dental plans at one stage there, and it was a video of Tom Hanks saying, go out and buy this dental plan. I'm thinking, gee, has Tom Hanks fallen on hard times? Does he really need to go and do some advertising for a dental plan? And again, that was just a deep fake. So it is pretty easy for these things to be replicated. How do we know whether we're talking to a real person? Is this really me, Pav? Is this
I was
really
about to say, is that really Matthew, or are we speaking to AI?
That's right.
What's
that secret expression you've got to ask me?
The whole thing is getting a bit out there, a bit whacked out, I reckon, because the amount of deep fake and the amount of trickery that goes on in Facebook, for example, more and more we're getting fake IDs. I got a message from someone the other day who said they got a friend request from a dead person. It's like, give me a break. So more and more we're going to be scrutinising these services, and it seems like more and more they're finding other ways around, getting through the loopholes or getting through the protections.
And actually, that's a really good point there that I might just mention, Pav, when you talked about getting a Facebook request or a friend request from a dead person. Make sure someone in your life has, someone trusted obviously, has passwords, has access to various social media sites. Because when someone does pass away, and especially if someone passes away suddenly, you don't think about that, you're too busy grieving, but then some people might try and get access to social media sites, and then you're trying to regain access. You don't know all those passwords. You don't know how to access them. Meanwhile, someone else is utilising your friend, your relative, their social media site. So make sure there's someone in your life that's got access to that information so that at least they've got the ability to shut them down if that's what you want to have happen, or to take control of them at the very least.
Yeah, it's very sad that we're going this way, isn't it? I've got let me read a couple of texts. These are to do with the grief bots. Leslie says, this is part of normal life. Everyone dies. Eventually a grief bot perhaps is a good idea, but perhaps it's pathological and will encourage more psychiatric disorders. I have to think that it isn't the best way of providing support for someone. Conversation with people is often better, direct or personal contact. That's true, Leslie, but if they've passed away, that obviously can't happen. So that's where this space is being filled. I've got here as well, can't be healthy. The point of grief is adapting to someone being totally and irrevocably gone, says Marg. And I've got here as well, artificial intelligence chatbots creating avatars of departed loved ones is a bit too out there for me. If we keep relying on these new tech fads for our ability to think for ourselves, we will become a thing of the past, which is not ideal.
No, and again, I think when I talk about some of these things from a tech perspective, I'm talking tech. I'm not talking psychology. I don't claim to have any sort of psychological applications in these, but it is fascinating that these things exist and these things are being utilised now as we speak. And whether that's good or bad or indifferent, I suppose I'm trying to keep away from that part of it. It's more about the technology there. But I tend to agree. I do worry how long they would be used for. And I do worry about the grieving process, but the simple fact is, this is happening now. People are using them right now as we speak.
Yeah, we're not blaming you, Matthew. It's okay, even though it may not really be you, but it's still not blaming you. It's okay.
I feel better.
Look, but this is a lot of texts are coming in on this, so it's obviously something people feel very strongly about. I got another one here from Dan. He says, "Both my parents passed away 6 and 9 years ago. It's taken all my energy to accept that they are dead. Hearing them via a robot would be very discombobulating and distressing for me." So. It can go both ways, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the idea would be that they'd be used in the short term. They'd be used at the funeral. You might be able to have a spot at the funeral where you could go and have a conversation with someone there, and maybe for the next week or so afterwards where you're trying to come to grips with it. But yeah, I think it would be bad if you kept using it for a long period of time. Obviously, when people are creating businesses, creating grief bots and obviously charging a fee for their service, they're probably not that concerned about how long you use it for. The longer the better, they might think. So there's always that continual problem about what's best for you and what's best for the company that's trying to generate a few dollars.
All right, look, we've got a few other interesting new tech stories to present with you. If you wanted to have some input here, 1300 800 222, you might want to tell us about some fancy tech device that you've just picked up or that you've just found out about. 1300 800 222. This morning we're talking to Matthew Dickerson, small business consultant and presenter of the Tech Talk podcast.
G'day, this is Becky Cole inviting you to join me each week for Saturday Night Country. For more than 30 years, we've been playing the best in Australian country music, as well as the overseas artists that you know and love. So whether it's the classic tunes that you grew up with, the best new releases, or the interviews of your favourite acts, you'll find it all on Saturday Night Country. Saturday Night Country, hear it anytime on the ABC Listen app.
We're talking Matthew Dickerson, all about tech this morning, Tech Talk, latest gadgets. I got a text here that says, all scams have to be factually correct. Received one yesterday saying my toll fee was unpaid. I live in Western Australia and we don't have toll roads. That'll be a giveaway.
It is a bit of a giveaway, and one of the things that's interesting is that the scammers here, they rely on just mass numbers. In fact, there was an alleged scammer they caught in Sydney just the other day, and they found some SIM boxes at this particular scammer's place. And a SIM box is a little box, Pav, that's got 250 SIM cards in it, active SIM cards.
Oh.
That can send approximately 150,000 text messages a day, and they found this person with more than one SIM box. And you've got to say, why do you need multiple SIM boxes that can send that many text messages? And again, the toll is a classic one. I live in a regional area, and I receive those text messages. There's no tolls where I live, so you can pick up that's a scam pretty easily, but they obviously make money out of them. And if you're in the city and you get one of these and they look legitimate and you click on the link and it goes to somewhere that looks exactly like that, you don't want to have your car registration removed. You're a bit annoyed that you didn't get your e-reader to pick up on that toll as it went through, so you pay the small amount of money and on you go with your life, not realising you just paid some money to a scammer. And
not only that, you've given them access to your details almost. They can probably scam more money out of you if you're not careful what you're doing. Someone's rung up about passwords, and we'll talk about them a little bit because I've got here, you mentioned before about make sure you write your passwords down and you share them. Someone says write your passwords in an address book, unlikely to be hacked. It is a good way to keep hold of your passwords. We have that. We've got a password address book, which is sitting there, and it's suggested that you put that in a good hiding place as well. Trouble with that is, Matthew, we can never find our password book because we've hidden it too well. So if thieves happen to find it, then they're doing pretty well, doing better than us.
Yeah, if the thieves find it, can you let us know? Because I've been looking for that.
Right. I've been trying to track down that password for years. I've got Sue has called from Ulladulla. G'day, Sue.
G'day, Pat. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
No, I was not going to be a person who once again asks how you're doing. And then I did it.
It just slipped out. It does that, Sue. Don't worry.
It does. Now, there's actually got three things now. One thing was that I used to use a little password with my daughter at school. There was somebody who was coming to pick her up. If the message didn't include this particular name, she was not to go with that person. Just a security thing.
Yep, that's a great
idea. I think I need to reinstate that with online, with contacting my family.
Yeah, that's
So
not
they know.
not a bad idea, you know.
Yes, so it's just one that they all know and I know, and we can just do that together for security.
I kept getting
And
emails from friends saying, here's 4 photos. There's no message with it. Just look at these photos, and it's got my friend's name on it. And I don't click on them because I'm suspect on them. And then I'll bring my phone and go, friend, and say, did you send me any photos? No. So someone's hijacked their name.
That's right. And I had a third-party fraud, which I fell for about 2 weeks before Easter. A particular service in my town that I had used in the last few months, and I was extra impressed with them. So on my feedback, I used the name of the person who had provided me with that service. Well, up comes this thing 2 weeks before Easter with all decked out as if it was coming from that business with their name and their photo and everything, and saying we're having a draw for a $25 treatment voucher. And it all seemed legit to me. And I don't know how easy it really was to fall in for that, but it was a third party fraud where they had nothing to do with it. And I fell for it because I trusted them, and they even mentioned the name of the person who provided me with the service.
That's pretty scary.
It is.
Did you lose much money, Sue?
Well, not in the upshot. I pressed the yes, I'd like to be in that draw for that voucher, have another massage, and immediately you were in the devil's playground. And 76.91 or something like that was the thing that was taken out of my account, and I was able to contact bank and MasterCard, and they retrieved that very quickly for me. Just makes better. I haven't heard anybody else around town saying they've been scammed by that business. Or what they thought was that business. I think that it's so scattered that nobody gets to share intelligence. That quite probably a lot of other businesses, one way or another, have the same thing happen to only a very few people, so it doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, let's take up some of those points with Matthew. Because of the scattergun effect that we're hearing about there, is there a lack of sharing of this information? And also, Matthew, how was it so hard to track this stuff down, the perpetrators of these crimes?
So actually, I want to talk about one in particular there that Sue, a good point that Sue brings up, and it's about spoofing an email address. And if I go back to the old days of snail mail, if I sent you a letter, Pav, and I said on the back of it that it came from the Prime Minister, you'd receive a letter and you'd think for all intents and purposes it came from the Prime Minister. There's no proof where that letter came from. There's just on the back of it, I might have said from the Prime Minister. And you go, look at this, pretty exciting, I've got a letter from the Prime Minister. You don't get scams like that because it costs too much money to send lots of, I'm talking, sending millions of letters via the post. There's not a good enough return for a scammer. If we go to email, I can send you an email and I can put a from address that is anyone, and you receive that email and it looks like it came from the Prime Minister or from Sue or from anyone I want to choose. So when you get that email, you see the from and you go, oh, that's legitimate because it's obviously come from that person. But spoofing an email address used to be very easy. There are some processes now called DMARC, and I won't go into the details of those, but there are some improvements being made in our email systems to improve that legitimacy. But in the past, it's been very easy to just make an email look like it came from anyone you wanted. And then you only have to get an email from that company, get a logo from their website, and you can make it look pretty legitimate. So the email that Sue talked about there, coming from a third party, looking like it came from another business, that's a fairly common scam because it is so easy to spoof an email address and to make it look like an email is coming from someone else. So that's a bit scary. So when you look at that, and again, if there's links in there, that's the big flag from my perspective. When I see links in any email, I'm a bit concerned because if you hover over those links, sometimes you look at that and you'll realise that the domain it's going to is not a legitimate domain. So if you see an offer come through from a business that you may think isn't quite legitimate, you can just go to their website and type in their direct site or Google their particular business, and you're more likely to find it as a legitimate site rather than clicking on a link in there. And that's why there's so many warnings about links. So that's a big one about having that spoofing those email addresses. Don't think it's legitimate because the email address looks legitimate.
But I mean, in that case, they obviously had information that was in Sue's previous correspondence and they were able to include that in their scam. So They're getting more and more sophisticated with these scams and these spoofs. So it's a bit of a worry where we're heading, Matthew, with that one. What about this? We hear that there's a device out there that people have that can, if you're standing on a train on your mobile phone, they can just walk up next to you and dump the contents of your mobile phone onto this device.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know of any device that can just do that automatically. You've got to take some steps on your phone to actually transfer data. If you leave your phone sitting at a cafe, for example, or you get up and go to the toilet or you duck over to pay or order another coffee, then if someone can get access to your phone, then they can start to transfer the data off your phone. And there's a few security steps in place there that you should have on your phone so that can't happen. But if someone's got access to your phone, but I'm not aware of any device that you can just be sitting there and you're on the train idly and someone walks past you nearby or stands beside you for 10 seconds and next thing you know, the whole contents of your phone has been transferred. People also get a bit concerned about having something like an FPOS machine that they just bump against your phone and that just transferred $20 out of your phone.
Oh.
But again, if you've got a phone and you're using, it doesn't matter whether it's an Android phone or an Apple phone, you've got to have some part of that phone where you actually authorise that payment to go. So yes, you can pay for something in a shop by clicking a certain button on your phone and actually holding your phone or even your watch against an FPOS machine, but you've got to do some part of that authorisation process.
Right.
So that's certainly improved from that security perspective as well.
I've got a text here that says, with Australia's free-to-air commercial television landscape, there are calls for a massive review and overhaul of the communications carve-up of the publicly owned digital spectrum, including higher licence pricing and local content creation requirements, especially drama. Unsurprisingly, networks befoul themselves. Have you heard about this one?
There's certainly a number of issues there. You're talking about some things. It's a complicated landscape now with pay TV that first of all came along and that was changing the world, and then now streaming, which really has absolutely changed the world. And so what happens with the free-to-air spectrum? Is free-to-air still relevant? It is today. Will it be in 10 years? Will it be in 15 years? Many people are watching their free-to-air channels via streaming now. So with the spectrum that's used there, could that be used for something else? And one of the other parts that's important, and there's been some reports recently with this, Pav, has been the anti-siphoning laws and the things such as sport. Can I still sit down and watch my national team, whether it be cricket or football or frisbee throwing or whatever it might be? Can I still watch that on free-to-air, or is that only going to be available on something like pay TV or on streaming where I've got to pay money for it? And there's a lot of conjecture around that. There's a lot of things that have changed. I think we lost our way with rugby for a long time when we used to be on top of the world winning World Cups, and then most of the rugby you could watch was on pay TV, and that meant, I think, a whole generation, they missed out on playing rugby union as they grew up, and then we're not anywhere near as good as we used to be in rugby now because we've lost that generation. So there is a long-term impact in terms of not being able to access some of these sports by the average person sitting at home or the average kid sitting at home.
I thought they legislated to make sure we saw all the important sporting events, Matthew.
Well,
excuse my cynicism there.
The definition of important sporting events, that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it? Bernie says, I got a scam email from my own email address. Can you ask your guests how this was possible?
Yeah, very easy. And that's what I'm talking about with that spoofing.
Yeah.
It's and I've actually demonstrated this at a conference. I've actually picked a random person in the audience and I said, give me your email address, and I've blocked my screen while I've very quickly typed in a couple of things, and I've said, rightio, I've just sent you an email from your email address, and they've got it there and they've kind of shown the audience going, look at this. So it's really easy. It literally takes 20 seconds to send an email to someone from that, and that's as a one-off, but you can do a very easy process where you just set up an automated process that will just continually send out emails. Now, I did say there is a process there that they're actually doing a back check, and some people have found this a bit frustrating. Gmail has been one of those, or Google with their Gmail has been one of these companies that started to implement this. And what it's meant in the short term is that some people have sent emails to people with a Gmail address and they get a bounce back because their domain, which is a legitimate domain, and they're sending a legitimate email, hasn't been set up with these extra components that allows a check to go when you send an email to a Gmail address. The ultimate aim is that every email provider out there does this back checking, and so everyone's got to set up their email correctly. At this point in time, it's not perfect because it's in the early stages of setting all of that up.
Right. I've got here, God forbid, we need good mornings. Heaven forbid if we may be forced to put our phones down and speak face to face, says Dave. Fair enough.
Or even turn on the radio and listen to the radio, Pav.
Yeah, a bit of that. Hey, look, listen, this one from Clancy says, password, I use the latitude and longitude of a fishing spot. This gives a 30 input password mix of upper and lowercase numbers and characters. After a couple of weeks of using it, it now just rolls off the tongue or fingertips.
So if you want a password tip, one of my favourite password tips is to create an expression. So it might be, I listen to Pav on the radio every morning, and then just take the first letter of all of those words. And because it's hard to remember a random series of numbers and letters, but if you take an expression like that and pull the first letter of each of those, you can easily remember it. So remember at school, you remembered the planets my very elderly mother just saw Uncle Ned pass. So that was the way that we learnt, and that was when Pluto was still a planet, but that's the way we learnt to remember the planets. So it's that type of thing. Remembering the first letter of each of those planets is a bit difficult, but remembering expression is quite easy.
Yeah.
You want to then make sure you've got in that expression uppercase, lowercase, and an other character, an at sign or a slash or a hash or one of those type of things. But that's a way to remember passwords. Coming up with a way to remember passwords is absolutely vital, I think, in today's environment.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And the fancier and the more complicated you can make it, the more protection you will receive from it. Look, I said, I've got a text here from Julie, said, I received a message tonight from Medicare telling me that my card has been suspended because of suspicious activities. I'm not sure if that's legitimate or, you'd have to, as Matthew was saying, you'd have to hover over the email address and make sure it is legitimate, and then just to do a double check, Google to make sure that the email address matches up with the Medicare website one. I've got here as well, I received a video scam supposedly from Dick Smith with a get-rich-quick scheme for only $1,000. Hey, pirate, mate, you didn't take that one up. I'll tell you what really does my head in, Matthew, and that is how many times David Koch and who else have we got there? Richard Wilkins. They keep getting arrested, Matthew.
Terrible, isn't it? And that's
What's
that terrible
going on?
clickbait that we talk about so much. It's so frustrating. The story sometimes doesn't relate to what it clicks on, and this is just a way for various websites to make sure they generate more traffic. So, yeah, poor old Koshy, he's been in jail a lot of times, and obviously Richard Wilkins as well. Yeah. And then you get those investment scams from whether it be Dick Smith or Twiggy Forrest or, as I said before, Tom Hanks. So all those different ones there. You just have to have a little bit of a grain of salt, and everything you see, you just have to take it with a grain of salt and think, is this legitimate? Does this seem right? Do we really think that these people are being arrested or these people are advertising investment schemes? Do they really need the money that badly?
It must be really frustrating, though, for Larry Emder and for Richard Wilkins and those people, constantly people coming up to them saying, hey, I've seen you've been arrested. And they go, oh, not again.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can do about it. They've tried to pull them down. They can't seem to have any control over their own image and their own identity. It's terrible.
Well, Twiggy Forrest has actually been doing a bit of that, where he's actually been taking some social media sites to court to say, you need to get better at your control. So he's actually, and I applaud what he's done, because for many people they'd say, oh, how frustrating is that? What can I do about it? I can't stop this happening across the world. Whereas Twiggy's saying, no, I think there should be some way of stopping that, because I don't want my image used to try and convince people to invest in some fraudulent investment scheme. I want to take some action against that. Now, he's had varied levels of success so far, but I applaud people actually doing that. And these social media sites should be held responsible for any of these things that are happening along those lines.
There should be like forensic digital detectives or something, and in the future I think there's going to have to be. Look, I did talk about a story that we were going to chat about, and we haven't got round to it yet, so I just wanted to quickly ask you about this new train that China's developing that's going to go at super speeds.
Super speeds, absolutely. And I've just come back from Japan myself, Pav, and obviously the Shinkansen in Japan, fantastic. I pulled out my phone, the clock is going at close to 300 kilometres an hour. I've been in China, I've been on the maglev trains in China, and I think I remember getting to almost 400, but they've got some new ones they're doing at the moment. They've already been clocking them at 623 kilometres an hour, but that's nothing. What they're working on is a low vacuum tube. They've got a 2 kilometre test site at the moment, and in that low vacuum tube, they believe they can get ready for it, 4,000 kilometres per hour. Now, most commercial jets are flying up around 800 or 900 kilometres an hour. They're not doing Mach 1. This will do over Mach 3. And the secret to it, of course, is that low vacuum tube. Wind resistance is your big killer. As you double your speed, you quadruple your wind resistance. So when you start to get up to 600, 700, 800 kilometres an hour, that gets pretty tough from a wind resistance point of view.
Yeah, but if you're in a vacuum tube, there's none of that. Plus, there's no friction on the wheels because you're on a magnetic buffer.
Yeah, that's right. So it sounds pretty exciting, doesn't it? But even 600 kilometres an hour, I mean, Melbourne to Sydney should be a very fast train. It's somewhere either number 2 or number 3 most travelled routes in the world with aircraft. That should be a very fast train. So seeing this technology, hopefully at some stage in Australia we say we should do a very fast train.
At 4,000 kilometres an hour, how long would it take you to get from Melbourne to Sydney?
Well, you'd have to
Not
get up
that
to
long.
that speed. That's the first part of it there.
Still.
But it might be a 20-minute journey. And so how
Goodness me.
fantastic would that be?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be that comfortable, Matthew. I want to iron out all the bugs first. Hey, always great talking to you.
Thanks, Dave. Good chatting.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew Dickerson there. The news is coming up. After the news, Warwick Long's going to join us. And we're going to talk all about shearing. Did you know there's a world shortage